Hello and welcome to Local Histories, where today we'll be paying a visit to the Denton family. In many ways, these characters have been the backbone of the League of Gentlemen, appearing in the very first and last scenes and encapsulating all the unique weirdness of Royston Vasey. This video will explore their entire history from start to finish, warts and all. So sit back and relax with a glass of fresh aquavita, unless of course you'd prefer tea. Like so many League of Gentlemen characters, the Dentons were inspired by real people and events. In this instance, the family of the League's writer Jeremy Dyson. Jeremy had gone to stay with some relatives who repeatedly insisted that he must make himself at home. But during his stay, he found he was constantly breaking the house rules without even knowing what they were. According to Jeremy, the worst incident happened thanks to a complicated set of locks on the front door. Having been told to come and go as he pleased, Jeremy returned one night at 9:45 to find the entire household had already gone to bed. He locked the door and went to sleep, thinking he'd done it correctly. He was awoken the following morning by a terrible argument, with an angry voice bellowing, "Who locked the front door? I couldn't get in. Who's responsible for this?" Knowing he'd accidentally upset his host yet again, Jeremy lay awake downstairs, now completely incapable of relaxing. This led to the creation of the Denton family and their many unwritten house rules, which became a constant source of anxiety and humiliation for their nephew Benjamin. As the characters of Auntie Val and Uncle Harvey were developed, their habits would begin to incorporate different stories of bizarre domestic behaviour, as well as a borderline obsession with their favourite animal, the toad. Elements of horror were also added to the Denton household as time went on, with hints of dark magic and multiple references to the works of Stephen King. The Denton children, Chloe and Radcliffe, started making their own appearances once the series was adapted for radio and turned out to be every bit as strange as their parents. As well as being one of the few normal characters in the League of Gentlemen, Benjamin Denton would also have the honour of being the first and last character ever shown in the TV series, starting with his arrival back in 1999 and ending with a much older Benjamin waiting to depart from the same platform in 2017. And it's certainly been an eventful couple of visits. The Denton family live in the Swan Mills estate of Royston Vasey, which is known to be one of the nicer parts of town. Their semi-detached house bears the nickname Toad Hall, a tribute to their favourite animal and a reference to the Kenneth Grahame novel The Wind in the Willows. The Denton family are extremely fond of rules and order, colour-coding various household items such as keys, scissors, towels and toilet paper. A second colour is not necessary in the downstairs toilet, where solids are not to be passed. The basement level is also home to the amphibiarium, where the Dentons breed and house their toads. The rest of the home is kept impeccably neat and clean, with no masturbation permitted whatsoever, as semen is such a persistent stain. The Dentons are practitioners in the art of witchcraft, a background detail at first, however their magic rituals go on to play a huge part in the plot of the anniversary specials. Before then, their nephew frequently witnesses some odd occurrences, with objects and people mysteriously disappearing and reappearing within Toad Hall. This is affectionately referred to by the show's creators as Denton magic. Val and Harvey also like to celebrate nudity, with the first Monday of every month being dedicated to this practice. Having said that, this date may be changed in order to confuse their nephew. Harvey is the patriarch of the Denton family and is described in the script as a middle-aged man with long swept-back white hair. As his nephew also shares the surname Denton, we can assume that Harvey had at least one sibling, who would be Ben's mother or father, although they are never mentioned throughout the series. It's unknown if the family grew up in London, Royston Vasey, or somewhere else entirely. We know that Harvey's childhood was not a happy one. At a young age, he became afflicted with terrible facial warts, earning the nickname Toad-Faced Denton, and being ridiculed by his own parents. In spite of this, Harvey would develop a strong affinity for these creatures, admiring the order and simplicity of the amphibian life cycle. But for some reason, he is shown to have a strong dislike of frogs, and has even banned the F word from being used in the home. Harvey is extremely protective of his pet toads, and is easily angered by their common misconceptions and stereotypes. To mock the toad within the Denton household is tantamount to insulting Harvey himself. We see this when he angrily shouts at his nephew in Series 1 for asking if toads can give people warts. According to his daughters, Harvey has a history of violence, as they claimed they once saw him beat a man until he and the man were crying. This sounds horrendous, especially if it was done in front of the children, but it's possible that the twins only witnessed this in his mind's eye, or maybe they were just lying to scare Benjamin. While Harvey's occupation is listed as being a witch in his DVD profile, he also claims to be staying late at the office when Benjamin is visiting, so maybe he's some kind of witch with a desk job. For those who may be wondering, men can also be witches, and many male witches prefer this term over a masculinized version such as warlock. Harvey is also something of an inventor, with numerous patents illustrated in a local book for local people. Most of these sketches involve elaborate contraptions for using the toilet in order to make the process more hygienic and pleasurable. Harvey also takes a professional approach to the breeding and showing of his toads. However, like his inventions, this is practiced as a hobby rather than being done for profit. Valerie Denton is described as a scrawny, nervous woman who prefers drab colours. She stands considerably taller than her husband Harvey. According to her profile, her favourite toad is the deaf leaf, and she is happiest while crying. Val has long brown hair, which, thanks to Nude Day, we can confirm to be her natural colour. Val's occupation is listed as virgin in the DVD profiles, which is a bit questionable considering the fact that she has 2 children. As she never mentions work outside of the house, and given the Dentons' extremely high standards of cleanliness, Val's occupation might be better described as a homemaker. But while she is devoted to her family and dearly loves her daughters, Val secretly wishes that she and Harvey had also had a son. This explains why she becomes so attached to her nephew Benjamin, who she wishes back into the home in Series 2 with a little help from the Devil's Toad. Val shares most of her husband's interests, including toad keeping and Nude Day. She also shows a talent for music, as she's seen playing the cello at the funeral for the Toads, and also plays the song Nellie Dean on the harmonium during one of the live shows. It's not known if she ever performs outside of the home, or if her shy and nervous demeanour prevents her from doing so. Val also appears to be prone to states of melancholy or depression, as observed when she was missing Benjamin, and by her state of total apathy following Harvey's death. Chloe and Radcliffe Denton are identical twins of around 7 years old, going by the ages of their actresses in Series 1. They are described as being pale and doll-like in the script, and are often seen holding hands and speaking in unison. The girls have a deeply unsettling presence, often appearing and disappearing around the house when least expected. They seem intellectually advanced for their age, share an impressive vocabulary, and often appear to know things that they shouldn't. By Series 2, it becomes apparent that they possess the ability to read minds. The twins are also convincing liars and use this talent to successfully manipulate their cousin Benjamin into doing their bidding. Chloe and Radcliffe have a special friend called Mr. Scarecrow, who lives in Farmer Tinsel's fields. However, he is not just a thing of cloth and straw, as he happens to be a local man named Andrew Ward, who was kidnapped and tortured by the farmer for sleeping with his wife. The twins are fully aware of this, but don't seem to care and have no intention of setting him free. Despite their strict upbringing, or perhaps because of it, Chloe and Radcliffe are fairly rambunctious children and enjoy nothing better than courting the lords of misrule. They sneak out unattended to visit a travelling circus, lock up their parents in the amphibarium, and cause chaos for their babysitter with a game they invented called The Wind in the Willows. The twins are never punished for their misdeeds, often managing to place the blame on Benjamin. Though the pair don't really care for toads, their DVD profile states that they prefer frogs, they do seem to be much closer in spirit to the reckless character Mr. Toad of Toad Hall. As adults, Chloe and Radcliffe continue to dress identically, speak in monotone, and finish each other's sentences. They also develop a strong aptitude for witchcraft, participating in dark magic rituals, and reading books with jaw-cracking words. They even manage to successfully resurrect their father's spirit and place it in Benjamin's body, in an effort to restore the balance and cleanliness of their home. It's unclear if they returned to live with their mother after Harvey's death, or if they never moved out in the first place. Benjamin Denton is Val and Harvey's nephew, who is presumably related through his uncle's side. According to his DVD profile, he is a media studies student who lives in London and enjoys hiking. He initially travels to Royston, Vasey to meet his friend Martin Lee, who disappears after an unfortunate run-in with some of the locals. Ben claims to have a girlfriend, but we don't know anything about her, and it's possible that he might just have said this to clear up a misunderstanding with Barbara. Though Benjamin tries to be polite and respectful as a guest, he is pushed beyond his limits by his family's lectures, rules and demands. This is exacerbated by the fact that he is forced to stay with them much longer than planned, thanks to Martin's untimely burning. He's also clearly terrified of his younger cousins, but let's be honest, who could blame him? Ben attempts to return to London at the end of Series 1, but is taken prisoner at the local shop, and returns to his aunt and uncle's house upon his escape. A sick and traumatised Benjamin spends the rest of Series 2 trying to escape his crazy relatives, who are planning to keep him as some kind of pet. However, we do know that he kept in contact with his Auntie Val as he returns to see her after Harvey's death over a decade later. The two of them also seem to leave things on an amicable note at the end of the anniversary specials. But for reasons that are completely understandable, Benjamin remains terrified of Chloe and Radcliffe. And of course, we can't discuss the Denton family without mentioning their beloved toads. Though most are referred to by their common or Latin titles, some of their prize specimens are also given their own pet names. These include Sonny and Cher, Harvey's would-be entrants in the annual Croker Parade, and Lady, Harvey's favourite toad from the radio series. In preparation for this video, I also conducted some extensive research on the subject of toads, in order to clear up any batrachian myths and misconceptions. These will come up whenever relevant, and you can find out more for yourself by following the links in the description. Val, Harvey and Benjamin all date back to the League of Gentlemen's origins as a stage show, yet it's difficult to pinpoint exactly when they were first created and performed. While there's every chance they date back further, we do know that they appeared on stage during the Gents' second residency at the Canal Cafe Theatre. The following information comes from the back of a flyer for the shows dated in October 1996. Visit the Dentons and treat the place like your own home. But remember, shoes underneath the barometer, bed by 8:15, and don't dare wake up Harvey's toads. These exact rules for the Dentons were retained well into the radio and television series, right down to the shoe placement and the exact time Val and Harvey lock up the house. We can also see that Harvey has already been established as a toad enthusiast. Where this idea originally came from is unknown, however it might be an early nod to the Dentons being witches. Throughout history, toads have been depicted as witches' familiars, and their poisonous skin secretions are commonly used in folk magic. Toads and toadstones are also referenced in 1973's The Wicker Man, a film that was heavily influential on the League of Gentlemen. However, it's also possible that the connection evolved naturally from Harvey's puffed-up toad-like face, or perhaps the old notion that owners can grow to resemble their pets. Either way, toad appreciation has since become a defining trait of the Denton clan. While the Gents were coming up with sketches for the Dentons, they found their ideas in a variety of places. For instance, the famous Aqua Vita routine was inspired when Jeremy Dyson worked at Waterstones, and a customer placed an order for a book called The Water of Life. This turned out to be a healthcare manual on the benefits of drinking urine, which the Gents thought was hilarious, and definitely something the Dentons might do. To perform this act on stage, the Gents created their very own wee machine, consisting of a fairy liquid bottle hidden in a sock. While preparing for the show's transition to radio, 2 new members were added to the Denton household. The League of Gentlemen scripts in that shows a list of handwritten notes marked Ideas for Radio series, one of which reads, A pair of twins who finish each other's sentences. Presumably this was the genesis of Chloe and Radcliffe, although they would go through some interesting changes along the way. The series would also place Benjamin as the show's main character, as he, Val and Harvey would feature heavily in all 6 episodes. Episode 1, A Guest at the Dentons, opens with Benjamin arriving in the town of Spent, which was later renamed Royston, Vasey. Ben arrives to attend an interview at the local plant and to pay a brief visit to some relatives. He has his train ticket stolen by a kleptomaniac nun before taking a taxi to Val and Harvey's. Ben is told to relax at his aunt and uncle's, while also strictly adhering to the house rules at all times, most of which are left unspoken until Benjamin happens to break them. After being told to help himself to any food, Benjamin is woken in the middle of the night and accused of eating some undressed rocket leaves that were meant for Harvey's toads. And now for our first pointless toad fact: these animals are carnivores and would have no interest in eating salad. Harvey complains that his toads cannot rest without a full stomach and forces Benjamin to read aloud until every last toad is asleep. Apparently they enjoy the works of F. Scott Fitzgerald, which must be read with an American accent for authenticity's sake. Thanks to his late night reading, along with the fact that the Dentons decide not to wake him, Ben misses his job interview. In episode 2, Ben attempts to catch the train back to London, only to hear that the last one departed in March 1953. After catching a cold on the way back, Val insists that he stays until fully recovered, though Harvey is concerned about leaving the boy alone next to a box of man-sized tissues. But before he can recuperate, Ben is dressed in a toad costume and forced to participate in the local fun run. He wins the race by a hop, and his prize is a holiday in Spent. Episode 3 presents the Aquavita sketch and introduces Chloe Denton, voiced by Steve Pemberton. We don't see Radcliffe until the following episode, and in this version, Chloe's twin sister is implied to be a huge deformed monster, or as her mother would put it, a delicate child. By episode 4, Benjamin has now spent a total of 3 weeks in Val and Harvey's care. He is offered a lift back to London as Harvey plans to drive south for the Reading Toad Fair, on the condition that Ben agrees to babysit. During the night, Chloe lets Radcliffe out of her room and the two start throwing their dad's favourite toad in a game of piggy in the middle. When the poor creature inevitably gets all squashed up, Chloe calls for Mr. Chinnery, effectively sealing Lady's fate. In episode 5, Benjamin is locked up as a punishment before learning that he's been eating food laced with hormones, a tincture of spinal fluid from over 150 individual toads. Harvey's dream is to create a powerful hybrid of human and toad, and as Benjamin is staying as a guest, they thought that volunteering as a prototype was the least he could do. Harvey predicts that Benjamin will be able to leap over 3 times his own height and knock a man unconscious with a flick of his tongue, and that Ben will eventually thank him. Ben disagrees, and the two have an argument over the superiority of toad or man. Their debate is interrupted as Ben takes a bad turn and starts to look very green around the gills. In the final episode, Ben threatens the Dentons with a poisonous red-eyed harlequin toad. Harvey calls his bluff, and Ben tells him to kiss it. The toad, I mean, not anything else. Harvey ends up poisoning himself for the sake of his research, and is, in his own words, hoisted by his own pet toads. However, we learn that the poisoning wasn't fatal, as Harvey is heard in the finale denouncing Mr. Chinnery for killing one of his toads. Just in case you were wondering, no one ever explains why Radcliffe is a monster. Maybe she was cursed by rival witches, maybe she was one of Harvey's failed experiments, or maybe she was afflicted by the same terrible condition as David Tatsyrup. As always, if you have any theories of your own, be sure to leave them in the comments. With the League of Gentlemen preparing to make the move to television, each of the Dentons needed a distinct visual style in terms of hair, makeup and costume, with certain characters needing to be cast anew. Mark, Steve and Rhys would all reprise their roles as Val, Harvey and Benjamin, and a suitable look had to be created for each character. As one of the token normals in Royston Vasey, very little was done to Rhys Shearsmith in order for him to play Benjamin. The character's wardrobe consisted of clothing fairly typical for a young man in his early 20s. At the time, Rhys was nearly 30, but still looked young enough to play the part convincingly. Considerably more work was done to Steve Pemberton in order to create the toad-like appearance of Harvey Denton, with an effective combination of makeup and prosthetics. Of course, the look was aided by Steve's ability to pull those bizarre facial expressions. Harvey's massive blue Y-fronts, provided by costume designer Eve Barr, also got a great laugh from the audience when first revealed. Mark Gatiss was dressed in long drab-coloured clothing for Valerie Denton and given a long brown wig to complete the look. The stylist also added a braid around Val's head, both to make her appear more feminine and because the character was initially thought to look too similar to Neil from The Young Ones. By coincidence, Nigel Planer, the actor who played Neil, would go on to feature in the Inside No. 9 episode Tempting Fate. By far the biggest changes were made to the Denton children. Sadly, Steve Pemberton would no longer be playing Chloe, and Radcliffe was redesigned as an ordinary child, at least on the outside. A call was put out for twin girl actors, and the parts were given to Megan and Rosie DeWolf. Acting in unison and constantly begging visitors to play with them, Chloe and Radcliffe were a tremendously creepy addition to Toad Hall. One of the more challenging aspects of bringing the Dentons to life was designing the set for the family home. A real house in Hadfield was used for the exterior, while the interior was built at the Yorkshire Television Studios. The Denton segments would be performed before a live studio audience. Originally, Toad Hall was envisioned as being oppressively clean and sterile, reflecting Val and Harvey's obsession with order and hygiene. This would have looked quite similar to the home of Judy Levinson in Series 2, but didn't quite express the general weirdness of the Denton house. In order to create the right atmosphere, the gents decided to characterise the Dentons' home with upsetting wallpaper, another nod to The Shining. A member of the art department struck gold after visiting a small shop run by a woman fairly reminiscent of Tubbs Tat Syrup, whose entire stock of wallpaper came from the 70s. They offered to purchase her entire stock, but she was reluctant to let them do so, because then she'd have nothing left to sell. With the concept for the Dentons' hideous decor now in place, more details were added, including a framed jigsaw puzzle and, of course, an abundance of ornamental toads. Steve, Megan and Rosie would attempt to count all of the toads in the room between takes, with the final total coming in at 47. The Denton set became one of the most recognisable scenes in the entire show. After Series 1 was broadcast, the gents would jokingly state that the wallpaper got better reviews than they did. Shot on a rail train running from Manchester to Hadfield, the opening scene of The League of Gentlemen quickly establishes Benjamin Denton as one of the lead characters. We also get a memorable voiceover gag from Annie Raines, a recurring side character who loses a perfectly good tortoise in episode 3 before disappearing forever after a psychic reading with Papa Lazarou. Ben takes a taxi to Swan Mills and is quickly ushered indoors by Auntie Val. Between his reactions to Val and Barbara, we start to get a good idea of the type of person Benjamin is. Someone who's generally polite and patient and, while no means oblivious to any odd behaviour, not one to be rude or make a scene. But everyone has their limits, and those are about to be tested. After being told to treat the place just like his own home, Benjamin accidentally breaks his first house rule by not removing his shoes. Harvey enters the room, clearly rattled by seeing muddy footprints on the carpet, and makes it clear that he is being inconvenienced by his nephew's presence. But of course, there's nothing much Ben can do about that, and he is only staying for one night. After an exhausting lesson on the colour coding of household objects, complete with poems, Benjamin is lectured by Harvey on the subject of masturbation. This will not be the last time the topic is raised. While Ben is eager to leave and meet his friend, Harvey insists on first giving him an extensive tour of the amphibarium, showing little regard for his nephew's needs or wishes. When Ben is finally permitted to leave, Martin fails to show up at the War Memorial as planned. Of course, we know this is because he has run afoul of Tubbs and Edward at the local shop, but Ben remains none the wiser, and ends up stuck with his aunt and uncle. In episode 2, Benjamin is abruptly woken by Val and Harvey, who immediately start cleaning up around him and inquiring about used tissues. Ben explains his predicament and makes a very reasonable request to use the phone. Reluctantly, Ben is presented with a toad-shaped telephone while Harvey activates a chess timer. Of course, Ben can't reach Martin, no one can, and is forced to try again later. Val stops him, stating that they'd prefer for him to wait until after 6 o'clock before sliding back out of the room. Apparently Val's movement within this scene was inspired by the 1961 horror film The Innocents. This scene was originally scripted differently, with Ben using several keys to unlock the phone drawer before being caught by Harvey. He would then be accused of trying to call an adult chat line at premium rates. And of course, Harvey refuses to let his nephew spend the afternoon, ear pressed to the receiver, frantically painting the French flagpole pink. Ben later resorts to a payphone on the moors, but knows he must be back by 8:15. We see Val listening to the speaking clock while Harvey prepares multiple locks that were not there in the previous episode. Either they visited a hardware shop and installed them while Ben was out, or this is our first bit of Denton magic. Harvey ignores Benjamin, who arrives at the door only seconds late, before retiring to the front room with Auntie Val and smugly taking their seats hand in hand. In the next episode, Benjamin joins the Dentons at the breakfast table. Presumably they let him back indoors after he learned his lesson about timekeeping. After being told he could get up whenever he liked, 9:15 was deemed unacceptable. The Dentons have been waiting to break their fast for almost 3 hours, and I like to think they've just been sitting there in silence the whole time while Ben slept on the couch. Val invites Benjamin to join them in a glass of fresh aqua vita, which Ben assumes to be mineral water. He quickly finds out what the water of life actually is and finds himself holding a glass before his micturating uncle. After watching Harvey downing a pint of his own piss, Val asks Benjamin if he would prefer tea. This was a sketch that the gents had enjoyed performing live, and they'd been excited to have it filmed for television. By this point, they'd really mastered the comedic techniques of weeing on stage, complete with starting, stopping, and changes in projection. The moment where it splashes Rhys on the hand is especially brilliant. After making inquiries and discovering a distinct lack of sophisticated weeing technology, the gents resorted to using their old stage prop. The feculence is in fact apple juice, which was quite tasty, according to Steve. And now it's time for another pointless toad fact. While Harvey claims that they consume their own urine, it should be noted that toads actually absorb water through their skin rather than drinking it with their mouths. As toads also prefer to do their eliminating in water, a lovely bit of word choice there that I'm sure Harvey would approve of, they may imbibe trace elements of their own urine. However, this is not something to be encouraged, and so, in captivity, their water should be changed on a daily basis. At any rate, consuming 3 times their own volume in urine a day would be a huge exaggeration. And, just in case anyone out there is tempted to try out the Aqua Vita plan for themselves, no, it's not a good idea to drink one's own pee-wee. You wouldn't think that needed to be said, but here we are. Once again, for those at the back, please don't drink your own piss. Episode 4 introduces us to 4 other members of the Denton household: the twins Chloe and Radcliffe, and the toads Sonny and Cher. And it's probably best that we don't get too attached to the last 2. In the script, the toads were meant to be wearing distinctive tartan collars, which later became the golden crowns that sit on top of their tanks. The toads were initially meant to be wearing these crowns, but apparently sellotaping a crown to a toad's head is a no-go for animal welfare. After the Aqua Vita incident, Ben decides he's had enough and is determined to leave. The Dentons insist that he stays and babysits the girls. Ben tries to leave anyway, but Val appears much more quickly than she should have and takes away his backpack. This scene also introduces us to the shoes of greater carpet weft restoration. According to Mark Gatiss, this idea came from the daytime chat show Vanessa and an episode that discussed anally retentive personalities. One of Vanessa's guests had apparently crafted a pair of these shoes for restoring his own carpets and would use them after having guests. Watching Harvey skate around the living room is funny enough, but this also sets up an event that will pay off later. We meet Chloe and a no longer monstrous Radcliffe as they greet their special scarecrow friend. In the local book, we learn that Mr. Ward was not the only victim of Farmer Tinsel, and he ended up going on a bit of a spree. Maybe he was always crazy, or maybe he just snapped after Mr. Chinnery killed his favourite dog. Back home, Benjamin reads the paper, and it's almost as if he can sense a sinister presence. According to the commentary, Ben was supposed to be reading a copy of The Turn of the Screw, a gothic novella used as the source material for several horror films, including The Innocents. The twins appear out of nowhere and beg Benjamin to play with them, with very definite echoes of the Grady girls from The Shining. Ben resists, until they threaten to tell their father they caught him shaking hands with the Governor of Love. Having successfully committed blackmail, the girls blindfold Benjamin and force him to play Piggy in the Middle, only the ball is one of Harvey's toads. The chaos suddenly falls silent, save for an ominous hissing noise. Ben removes the blindfold to see Val and Harvey have returned, and the twins are nowhere to be found. Harvey screams out Sonny's name as he spots the toad melting on the gas heater. A real toad probably wouldn't melt, but this is just too funny to argue with. Straight after that, Cher is impaled on one of the spiky shoes. According to the gents, the scene reaches Euronymous Bosch levels of visual insanity as it comes to an end. Episode 5 shows a very solemn and serious moment as the Dentons hold a funeral for the deceased toads. Harvey is dressed in his best frock coat and hat and leads the way as Val plays a mournful tune on the cello. Chloe and Radcliffe each carry a tiny coffin as Sonny and Cher are laid to rest. Ben is showing remorse as well as apprehension over what is to come. Another scene that took place after the funeral was cut for reasons of time and strangeness. but is still included on the DVD. In it, the Dentons are having a wake for their toads, and Val is apparently too grief-stricken to eat a thing. Ben tries to apologise to Harvey, but is given the silent treatment. But when he offers to make amends, Harvey ponders the idea and seems to suggest something to Auntie Val. The two of them begin laughing hysterically and banging on the table before coming to an abrupt halt and carrying on in total silence like nothing happened. It's both a weird and funny scene, and I really wish it hadn't been cut. Having suffered enough Denton madness for one lifetime, Ben steals the phone and calls Babs Cabs to arrange a getaway. Barbara, who had just recently placed an advert in the Lonely Hearts column, gets the wrong end of the stick. After driving Ben to a secluded spot, Barbara makes her move, and for the record that's Steve in the car molesting Reese, and Ben is forced to address their misunderstanding, explaining to Barbara that he's already spoken for. After trying to comfort Babs, albeit awkwardly, she drives off in a state of embarrassment, leaving Ben stranded on the moors. He ends up helping the lady with the pram, a running gag throughout the episode, and apparently ends up back where he started. Benjamin's final ordeal with the Dentons, at least for this series, has him punished for the untimely deaths of Sonny and Cher. The twins want Ben to come on their school trip, but their mother informs him that he and their father have some grown-up things to discuss. I'm not sure what the Vaseline and rubber hose are for, but maybe that's something we don't want to know. We next see Harvey and Benjamin from a suspicious angle, but it's revealed that Ben is only cleaning a toilet brush. Finding himself trapped in an endless cycle of scrubbing, because a dirty brush is a useless brush, Benjamin finally snaps and refuses to comply any further. Val and Harvey are horrified by the insolence and react to each violation of their order as if they were vampires being splattered with holy water. It's then we hear Harvey's tragic backstory, but as soon as we start feeling sorry for him, he whips out an itemised bill of costs incurred during Benjamin's stay. And for some reason, Val has a Visa machine that she keeps in the bathroom. Between these two scenes, we see Chloe and Radcliffe on their school trip at the farm. I hope they gave their regards to Mr. Scarecrow. While watching Mr. Chinnery help Monica the cow through labour, the twins are very quick to correct him as they see fit, leading to the immortal line, "My father knows about these things, Mr. Chinnery, it is its rectum." As the birthing goes horribly wrong, Chloe notes that the matter pulled from Monica's bum looks like offal. I'm surprised she was able to identify that, so let's hope the twins haven't been hanging around the butcher shop after dark. Later that night, we see Benjamin lost on the moors as he attempts to escape from Royston Vasey. He meets Tubbs Tat Syrup, whose dreams of moving to London have just been crushed. If only Ben had told her where he was going. Instead, he asks if there's a shop nearby where he can get something to eat, and Tubbs takes him there, still wearing the boots she stole from his dead friend. And that's where we leave the Dentons at the end of Series 1. You may be thinking that no one in their right mind would ever return to Val and Harvey after that experience, but of course Ben had his reasons. Those reasons being that he ends up being kidnapped at the local shop, kept as a plaything for the now monstrous David, and is left delirious with fever. The second series opens with Ben's escape, and a whole new world of suffering awaits him at Toad Hall. Series 2 of The League of Gentlemen was supposed to start not in Royston Vasey, but in a South American dockyard, as the Colombian natterjack toad began its journey towards the Denton household. This may seem like an unusually exotic location for the series, but then again, we did end up in the Caribbean. Benjamin escapes from Tubbs and Edward's prison on the night of a storm, and runs in a frenzy throughout the town. By morning, the South American toad has arrived at its new home, after being mistakenly called a frog. Presumably the courier, played by the location manager for Series 2, managed to get lost along the way, as we saw him cycling down Royston Vasey High Street while it was still dark. Back inside, we see Harvey's amazing sexy toad apron, while Val looks sad and distracted. She's confronted by the twins, who appear out of nowhere and ask her why she's thinking about cousin Benjamin. Apparently Val thinks the house feels empty without him, and wishes that Harvey had given her a son as well as daughters. Harvey disagrees, pointing out the difficulties a son would provide, with constant sojourns to the bathroom as Junior shakes hot white coconuts from the veiny love tree. Ben continues to run frantically through the town and the Pandemonium Circus, where Chloe and Radcliffe are seen aiming a rifle. The twins then turn their mind-reading abilities onto the giant, and we're left with zero mystery regarding any of his bodily measurements. Back at Toad Hall, Harvey is admiring his new specimen, which is also known as the Devil's Toad. Val, still in her state of melancholy, listens apathetically as Harvey talks of the Mapapa tribe of the Shakti Hills. Harvey explains that squeezing the toad's belly while making a wish will grant a person their heart's desire. He dismisses this idea as a myth, but keeps holding the toad while dreaming of his self-lowering lavatory seat. He heads upstairs to make toilets, leaving Val alone with the Natterjack. Harvey is heard humming the tune to the Dentons' House Rules song, which we'll be hearing in full in the very near future. After looking far too happy while relieving himself, Harvey is shocked to see the toilet lid moving back into place all by itself. He rushes downstairs to find Val making her own wish, and, thanks to the girls, we know exactly what she must be thinking. This entire scene is reminiscent of The Monkey's Paw, a play that must have been heavily influential on the gents, as it's referenced frequently throughout their work. Val hears a knock, throws away the poor toad, and Harvey urges her not to answer. She opens the door anyway, and lo and behold, it's Benjamin. He mutters the word local, and for years I thought he was saying so cold, before collapsing in the lobby holding a snow globe, Citizen Kane style. In episode 2, we see that Val and Harvey have taken Benjamin into their care, and Ben seems to have forgotten everything about his ordeal. He's tucked into an old-fashioned bed, described as the kind you'd imagine a grandma expiring in, and in an earlier draft, Harvey was seen tying him down with thick leather straps. His aunt and uncle don't much like the look of his temperature, so they decide to try it in his mouth. Hopefully the thermometer had only previously been in his ear. In a deleted scene, Harvey would have suggested getting him professional help at a hospital, but Val would refuse, saying that his place is here, with us. Please, we can re-educate him. The two would then kiss goodnight before getting into bed on either side of their nephew. The notes for Series 2 suggest that the episode would have a re-education of Benjamin Denton sequence, complete with a My Fair Lady style musical number, during which Harvey would exclaim, "I think he's got it." The notes also include a moment where Benjamin looks at his Uncle Harvey and sees the face of his kidnapper, Tubbs, something of an in-joke considering both characters are played by the same actor. What happens next in the televised version is explained in the commentaries as a kind of fever dream, as Val and Harvey burst into song about the house rules. They gleefully proceed to drag Benjamin from room to room, throw him down the stairs, and stick his head down the toilet. Rhys was genuinely sick during filming, and so a lot of the suffering we see on screen is very real. An entire verse was cut from the musical number, and the lyrics would have gone as follows. "We must be good custodians of all that's come our way, so turn that light switch off, my friend, don't let it burn all day. And while you're walking down the stairs, go light like a balloon. A carpet is a finite thing, it wears out all too soon." In the commentary, Steve Pemberton makes note of his West End delivery of the phrase Auntie Val's vaginal douche, and the gents inform us that the prop was knocked together from an old penis expander. Make of that piece of info whatever you will. While the gents were initially hesitant to do a musical number, and apparently Steve's brother absolutely hated it, fans of the League of Gentlemen still enjoy it, and the song would make a resurgence during the 2005 live tour. A sing-along version, complete with lyrics and a bouncing toad, can be found on the DVD. A number of ideas for the Denton story were ultimately scrapped for Series 2, but would have been great to see. As well as the aforementioned My Fair Lady sketch, there was a scene featuring Ben feeling sick at the breakfast table, prompting Harvey to go into excruciating detail over the finer points of regurgitation. However, he does insist that Benjamin uses the upstairs toilet, as in this house, vomit is classed as a solid. There was also a plot point in which Harvey started lacing Ben's food with drugs to study the cross-fertilisation of species, eventually trying to turn his nephew into a human-toad hybrid, much like he did on the radio. But of all the abandoned ideas for Series 2, the one that appeared to be the most developed was a sketch called Marianne. A few variations of the Marianne plot have been spoken of by the gents, but the most detailed version can be found in the League of Gentlemen scripts and that. This starts with Ben waking at 5:45 and realising it's time for breakfast. He gets up, catches sight of his reflection in the dressing table mirror, and is shocked to see he's been dressed up in a pretty little peasant blouse and skirt, with his hair arranged into pigtails and his cheeks and lips crudely rouged like an Aunt Sally. Val calls upstairs for Marianne, and Benjamin, not sure what to do, heads downstairs. Val and Harvey then begin speaking to him in French, and Ben begins to play along. Eventually he starts to believe that he is a female French exchange student who's come to stay in Royston, Vasey. Ben is later seen going into Chloe and Radcliffe's room, carrying a pink leotard. He starts getting changed and is confused by the sight of his chest, which is of course flat and covered with hair. The twins appear and immediately start screaming. Val and Harvey storm upstairs and their mother lets out a silent scream while covering the girl's eyes. Harvey then covers his wife's eyes. Benjamin, still confused, starts trying to explain himself in French, and Harvey asks why he's speaking in that ridiculous tongue. Harvey insists that they go to the authorities, as Ben is clearly dangerous, but Val explains that the boy is sick and that they mustn't treat him like a criminal. Harvey says, if he is to stay with us, he must be guided by us in everything. Is that understood, boy? To which Ben nods. Another ending was planned for Marianne, in which the Dentons would play along with the facade until the doctor arrived. Upon finding his patient dressed up and acting like a French girl, Val and Harvey would drop the act and pretend to be completely shocked by their nephew's odd behaviour. Sadly, the Marianne sketch was dropped prior to filming, as the ending was felt to be a bit too similar to the next sketch. Episode 4 contains one of the most memorable Denton moments in the entire show, and I'm probably going to have to get a bit creative with the next few screen grabs. Ben wanders downstairs in his dressing gown, only to find Val and Harvey completely naked. Happy Nude Day, everyone. Apparently this ritual is observed on the first Monday of every month, and the Dentons mustn't make any exceptions. Shortly after Benjamin is stripped of his robe, the bell rings and he's told to answer the door. Ben complies, trying to act natural, but the doctor is clearly taken aback. Walking into the house, they see Val and Harvey now fully clothed and mortified to find Benjamin butt naked in the lobby of this house. Harvey concludes that Ben must have been upstairs, spraying his belly with sticky white love piss, and Val ushers him back to his room with a slap. Harvey manages to talk the doctor into prescribing sedatives and notes that Nude Day doesn't fall until the 15th. The script has some very interesting directions for this scene, especially for Auntie Val. The notes say that her bottom is slim like a man's. No idea how they managed that. Another note says she is drying a glass and the tea towel covers her minge, which did not happen in the final edit. The gents also know that this was the very first nude drag scene shown on television, which is something of a unique accomplishment. Mark's merkin was apparently forged from 2 fake beards, as the costume department couldn't find him one to fit. The end result was so massive that Rhys Shearsmith said it might as well have the word welcome stamped on it. There's also an entire DVD bonus feature dedicated to it, hilariously titled The Mingeomorph 2000, showing the CGI effect used to stop his makeshift muff from looking too patchy. Isn't it amazing what they can do with digital technology these days? In earlier drafts, Harvey was meant to be smoking a pipe, while Val embroidered a toad with an arrow in its eye onto a giant tapestry. We would have also seen the Dentons going outside, with Val and Harvey greeting the locals, shopping at the supermarket, and Harvey using a public urinal, all with no place to put the change. The original script also mentioned Chloe and Radcliffe, with the Dentons saying, "In this house, our actions are homogenous. As we speak, the girls are in their geography class completely starkers." I'm guessing this was cut because the talk of naked 7-year-olds was probably considered a bit distasteful. Episode 5 is where things go full misery, with Benjamin now making his first proper escape attempt. He waits until the Dentons leave for the Toad Club, spits out the pills he pretended to swallow, and starts rummaging around the room. He finds a copy of the magazine, Women and Toads, along with a postcard that is supposed to be from Ben, telling his family he plans to stay at the Dentons for at least 9 years. He takes the magazine and coat hanger and manages to retrieve the key. As Ben opens the door, he sees that Val and Harvey were one step ahead of his plan and haven't left the house at all. Having been defeated, Ben locks himself back in the room and passes the key outside. The 2 Dentons grin at their nephew's compliance. A few minor details have changed between this version and the scripted version. Harvey's sock drawer was meant to have socks laid out and possibly neat in colour and size, which we don't quite see. The magazine should have shown the Dentons holding toads provocatively, and there was meant to be a centrefold featuring a woman with toads over her ladiness. As Ben went to exit the room, Chloe and Radcliffe were also supposed to be standing there. But Ben's spirit hasn't been broken entirely, as Series 6 sees them finally escaping the clutches of Val and Harvey. They discover that their nephew has managed to force the lock and has caused a trail of anarchy throughout the Denton house. Pictures are hung crooked on the staircase, and a trail of flour leads all the way from the lobby down into the amphibarium. Harvey grabs the hoover and exclaims, "I must clean it up, Val. I must." Downstairs in the amphibarium, Val and Harvey follow the trail into a large glass tank with a submarine-style door. This was supposed to be Ben's pen, and not the kind that Pauline Campbell-Jones would appreciate. Benjamin appears and confronts the Dentons with their plan to keep him as some sort of pet, complete with evidence. He also has one of Harvey's toads in a blender, which, according to the script, is supposed to be Lady. However, he's intercepted by Chloe and Radcliffe holding a rifle. They must have got some practice in at the Pandemonium Circus. They usher Benjamin out at gunpoint, but instead of freeing their parents, they lock them inside the soundproof tank and liquidize Lady. The girls walk away triumphantly and sit down holding hands in the exact same pose we saw from Val and Harvey in Series 1. In the scripted version, it's Ben who slams the door in the Dentons, their cries muted by glass, and considers flicking the switch as Harvey stares out at him imploringly. Ben changes his mind, puts down the blender, and heads towards the stairs before saying, "Oh, thanks for having me." The girls would arrive later of their own accord and pick up the blender while ignoring their parents' silent cries for help. Chloe would then recite the riddle to Radcliffe before hitting the button on the blender. In much earlier drafts, Ben was far more sadistic in his punishment of Harvey. With Lady the Toad held hostage, he would first force his uncle to pass a solid into the downstairs toilet. And for his next trick, he would make Val hand him a copy of Women with Toads magazine and a box of tissues, saying, "You know what you have to do." Aghast at the thought of pulling his purple pleasure pipe, but still fearing for Lady's safety, Harvey would grab the jazz mag and slam the door, leaving Val sobbing on the outside. Either way, Ben escapes to an ongoing pandemic and an angry mob. He spots the local shop in the distance, and it all starts coming back to him as he points and screams, "There it is!" The mob follow with their torches and pitchforks, believing he's leading them towards the source of the deadly nosebleeds. We last see Ben comforting Barbara after accidentally bringing about the destruction of the local shop and the deaths of the Tat Syrup family. Or that's what we thought at the time. For more details on this scene in particular, you can check out my video on the history of Tubbs and Edward. Series 2 really ramped up the horror and madness of the Denton clan, complete with devil's toads, telepathic twins, full frontal nudity, and a musical number. It's hard to know how the gents could up the stakes from here, or why on earth Benjamin would ever return to Royston Vasey, which was probably the reason the characters were left out of Series 3 entirely. However, the Dentons would continue to make non-canon appearances in the live shows and had brief cameos in the League of Gentlemen's 2000 Christmas special. Valerie Denton appears in the Charlene Stella segment of the Christmas special as the head of the shady organisation called Solutions. She sits at the centre of the table, flanked by Vinny and Renee. This seems like a fitting role for Val, as the Solutions group is big into witchcraft and voodoo. Would that make Val a voodoo lady? However, it should be noted that this appearance is non-canon and is later written off as a cheese dream by Bernice. We also see what might be a Victorian relative of Harvey Denton shaking a collecting tin while dressed in forbidden Salvation Army black. Again, this is all part of Mr. Chinnery's story, so it's not clear if this actually happened. However, it was nice to see the Dentons again in this special. The Dentons also performed the famous Aquavita sketch in the 2001 live tour. While the scene was cut from the DVD, probably for time and because it was a bit too similar to the televised version, their behind-the-scenes documentary contains a funny and disgusting anecdote. Before the final show of the tour, Mark Gatiss, who was apparently the one who preferred to stay on script, had some ideas. One of these involved Reese walking on stage to do Aquavita, only to find Auntie Val kneeling in front of Uncle Harvey, whose dressing gown was partially open. Mark pretended to give Steve a blowjob before being startled and spitting out some weird white substance. And that's how the documentary got its title, Mayonnaise and Yogurt. While the characters did not appear in the League of Gentlemen's Apocalypse, the Dentons provided the opening act for the 2005 pantomime show The League of Gentlemen Are Behind You. Val, Harvey and Benjamin would sing the Dentons' house rule song, complete with the missing verse that had been cut from the TV show. Chloe and Radcliffe appear as two hand puppets, and Auntie Val's vaginal douche was now kept out on display, as Ben held aloft a massive water gun. The final two lines were also changed as Mark and Steve stripped down to a pair of nude suits, which were sometimes switched for extra comedic effect. The lyrics went, "We know what you are thinking, that all this work seems tough, so take a leaf from Ad and Eve and do it in the buff." Over a decade later, the Dentons would make their final appearance in the TV series with the League of Gentlemen's anniversary specials. Set in 2017, the main story arc involved Benjamin Denton returning to Royston, Vasey for his Uncle Harvey's funeral, and the series of bizarre events that followed. Part 1 opens with a repeat of the very first joke, as Benjamin, now much older, reads a letter from his Auntie Val. She happens to be reading the letter aloud while sitting right next to him, and being the first Monday of the month, she is dutifully observing Nude Day. And I swear, Mark's merkin is so huge by this point, it needs its own billing. They take Barbara's taxi to Swan Mills, and Zee and Ben have a minor dispute over pronouns. Val notes that Harvey would have approved, as he always liked to have everything properly labelled. After fishing out the key from under the mat, Val invites Ben into the house. We notice that, since Harvey's passing, Toad Hall has been left in a state of disrepair, and an apathetic Val could no longer care less whether visitors take their shoes off. She appears to be depressed, which is understandable given the circumstances, and it's actually quite upsetting to see her in this state. However, she's not going through the grieving process alone. Chloe and Radcliffe are still around, still creepy, and still wearing the same clothes as each other. And while I didn't realise this in my first watch, the girls were recast with another pair of twins, namely Francesca and Lily Knight. Later that evening, the Denton women sit Benjamin down at the table to have some cake, and that icing looks interesting. Val seems immensely proud of her daughters and keeps referring to their books, which, knowing this family, are probably spell books. The twins read out a limerick which goes like this. "Our father has passed, he was great, sir. He had two simple rules we can state, sir. A toad's a fine pet, and please don't forget, in this house we don't masturbate, sir." Talk then turns to Uncle Harvey and the funeral. Val says that he'd originally wished to be cremated in two separate pieces, as he couldn't stand the thought of his reproductive and evacuatory regions being mingled with the remains of his own face. But after purchasing and labelling two different urns, Val was unable to find a crematorium willing to slice him up and burn him in two sittings. But it's alright, as apparently they've come up with another plan. Later that evening, we see Chloe and Radcliffe sneaking up on their sleeping cousin while wearing funeral veils. They steal a lock of his hair, saying, "All is ready, he will return, and everything will be tidy again, forever and ever and ever." The twins continue their work into episode 2, and it's clear that they've been setting up some kind of dark magic ritual in order to resurrect their father. Down in the amphibarium, Ben is still drowsy from the cake, which had been laced with a psychotropic extract from the skin of a toad. Apparently his conscience must be fluid for what is to follow. The twins reveal Harvey's body, still sitting upright in his favourite chair. However, he's not quite dead. Uncle Harvey was preserved at the point of the soul's departure, his every bodily fluid replaced with an embalming tincture of his own devising. Val notes that he was delighted to be free of the curse of his own semen. Benjamin has been chosen as a willing vessel in this ancient ceremony. As he's forced to swallow a live toad, the twins chant, Val dances, and Harvey's frozen face stays grinning from across the room. We then see our most spectacular piece of Denton magic to date, as Harvey's soul leaves his body and enters Benjamin. After this happens, Ben's face puffs up and his voice changes tone, before stating the new Denton house rule, "In this house, we don't die." As Ben's body recovers, Valerie walks him upstairs, now dressed in Harvey's clothes. He's still a little confused, remembering being somewhere dark and murky. However, he quickly comes to and is absolutely disgusted with the state of the house. he discovers all manner of abominations. A spoon in the knife drawer, the tool of Satan himself, otherwise known as a lavatory brush, and the forbidden bottle of toilet duck, because the toilet is no place for a duck. At this point, the Denton women are beginning to wonder, what have we done? Later, as Ben/Harvey frantically hoovers the ceiling, Val decides that enough is enough and attempts to break the spell. She tries speaking directly to Benjamin, but Harvey says that he must not be mentioned in this house, as he is an agent of misrule and an imp of the perverse. Val holds up a mirror and Harvey sees Benjamin reflected back at him, and realises his hands are now Harvey's hands. To his horror, Harvey recalls where these hands have been, feeling them hold a sock over a male member, excited to the point of making tummy pancakes. In his disgust, and with Benjamin still fighting to resist the possession, Ben manages to expel Harvey's spirit along with the still living toad. The anniversary specials end with an emotional moment, as Val sees her nephew to the train station. She seems genuinely sorry for what she and her daughters have done, but Ben is quick to forgive her. Their final lines, delivered to Joey Talbot's poignant musical score, resonated with many League of Gentlemen fans who'd been feeling nostalgic for Royston Vasey. Sometimes you can't go back, but you can visit. A red bag flutters in the background as Benjamin prepares for the journey home. In 2018, we caught up with the Dentons once more on the League of Gentlemen's live tour. During a voiceover, Val tells Benjamin once again that she's sorry for tying him to a chair and forcing him to swallow a live toad that was impregnated with the soul of his dead uncle. You know, the usual family stuff. And while she notes that Harvey was the love of her life, Val has decided to get remarried to a man named Howard, who was selling his dead wife's vaginal douche on eBay. So it's nice to hear she's moving on. Val appears on stage wearing a wedding dress while talking on the phone to Chloe. That's Chloe, her daughter, and hopefully not Chloe, the weird phone stalker from Inside Number 9. She explains that Howard is running late and reminds Chloe that the toads are only coming to the night do, which is quite responsible of her seeing as toads are nocturnal. But it looks like Val's big day is about to go horribly wrong, as the vicar turns out to be Papa Lazarou. After reciting the Lord Dave's Prayer, which is a load of gibberish including the jingle for Birdseye potato waffles, Val flees and Papa Laz ends up marrying all of the women in the audience. Ben responds by letter in a voiceover of his own, respectfully declining Val's wedding invitation, as he's still dealing with many difficult memories since Uncle Harvey's passing. We then get a flashback to a particular morning in early April, allowing Harvey Denton to take to the stage for one last time. After accusing his nephew of forever regrouting the bathroom tiles with his own ready-mix paste, Harvey confesses a delicate problem, that he's been unable to drink his daily dose of aquavita. To aid in this production, he asks Benjamin to hold the jug while Auntie Val plays the harmonium, in an effort to put Harvey in a state of complete relaxation. It all goes terribly wrong, complete with fractious bowels, rupophobia and emetophilia, all being triggered one by one as shit, piss and vomit flies everywhere. At the end, Ben delivers the punchline, "I only came down for a crumpet." The experience of dealing with weird relatives is something many of us can relate to, but the Denton clan take this to a whole new level. The way they progress from eccentric but believable oddballs to over-the-top full-blown maniacs is quite brilliant, and almost felt like an actual progression, weird as that sounds. Mark Gatiss and Steve Pemberton went all in for their roles as Val and Harvey from the very beginning, and Reece Shearsmith does an excellent job of playing the straight man. And let's not forget Jeremy Dyson, who was responsible for coming up with the Dentons in the first place. While not an actor, his contributions to the show have always been absolutely vital, and many of our favourite settings and characters simply wouldn't exist without him, even if he chooses to stay out of the limelight. He may be the unsung hero of the League of Gentlemen, but he's every bit as important as the other three. And for that, Mr. Dyson, we salute you. So that was the entire history of the Denton clan. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I'm sure there are others on this channel that would pique your interest. Please remember to like, subscribe, and as always, leave your suggestions for future videos in the comments below. And of course, as this video is going out on the first Monday of the month, I'd like to wish a happy Nude Day to one and all.